Hey guys, welcome to Lecture 3 in the Introduction to Anatomy and Physiology. Today we're going to talk about organization in organisms. That's right, organisms are organized. Hey, maybe you've never made that connection in terms of vocabulary, but that's right, we're organized, we're compartmentalized, and that makes us somewhat unique when it comes to the physical world. Anyway. Of course, we're all made of atoms, and when we think about our levels of organization, we got to start at the atomic level. And of course, atoms are codified in the periodic table. There's, what is it, 104 naturally occurring elements? I don't know. But they include things, of course, things like hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen. And they're your top four. They're the ones you're made of. You're, of course, made up of other things, right? You got lots of different metals, and you got sulfur and phosphorus as well, but they're the four major constituents atomically. We take atoms and they form chemical bonds, whether they're covalent or ionic, to form. Oh, I misspoke here. A molecule is always going to be a covalently bound compound, but you also have lots of salt and ionic compounds as well. But those molecules include water, glucose, carbon dioxide, and they're relatively small. Water's got 3 atoms, CO2, 3 atoms. Glucose has 24, but still small. However, when we think about biological systems, we think about large molecules, macromolecules, or biologically active biomolecules. And there's 4 classes that we focus in our superficial treatment of biochemistry here and at the high school level, and they include things like the proteins, lipids, carbohydrates, and nucleic acids. Well, next up on our level of structural organization will be the components that make up cells, the organelles. Organelle means little organ, and organelles include things like the nucleus, right? That's the control center of the cell where you find DNA. The Golgi apparatus, right? That's that series of flattened sacs that's associated with protein export and modification. The mitochondria, right? The powerhouse of the cell where cell respiration occurs. Or the endoplasmic reticulum, the other series of flattened sacs contiguous with the nuclear membrane where I synthesize proteins and lipids. I take all these organelles together, and there's many more, and I make a cell. So there's lots of different cell types in humans. I don't know, somewhere between 250 and 350 or 400 cell types, as I recollect. And you're familiar with a lot of them, like the skeletal muscle cell, right? You can see a diagram up here of skeletal muscle cell. Or the erythrocyte. And of course, erythrocyte is just a fancy word for a red blood cell. But we got lots of fancy words in anatomy and physiology, like leukocyte. Leuko means white. That's a white blood cell. Or the Pacinian corpuscle. And a Pacinian corpuscle is a specialized sensory neuron that's found in your skin, and it senses pressure. The Pacinian corpuscle, pressure for Pacinian. Anyway, we take these different cell types to make up tissues. Now, tissues are easy. There's only 4 major tissues: epithelial, connective, muscle, and nerve. And we call them the 4 C's, right? Because epithelia covers, all the coverings of your body inside and out are made up of epithelial cells. Connective tissue connects. That includes things like, tendons, ligaments, all kinds of stuff. Blood's a connective tissue. Muscle, which contracts, and nerve, which conducts, right? So there's 4 C's. Well, we take different types of those 4 different tissues, and we put them together to form organs. Most organs are made up of all 4 tissue types, and they include things like the heart, the lungs, the brain, the skin, the kidneys, the spleen, the stomach, etc. And we take multiple organs to make up organ systems, right? So the respiratory system is made up of the lungs, the trachea, the bronchi, and the oral cavity, as well as the diaphragm is part of your respiratory system as well. That's a muscle. Or the circulatory system, right? It's made up of the heart and the arteries and the capillary beds and the veins. Anyway, there's 11 different organ systems that are made up of these organs, all right? So 11 different organ systems. Together they form the organism. Next are characteristics of life. So all living things share common characteristics. And if you don't have all those things, you aren't alive. Holt's Anatomy and Physiology starts off talking about movement as a common characteristic of life, and I don't buy it. There's lots of organisms that don't have any mode of movement, but anyway, there it is. All living things do respond to the environment. Individuals respond to the environment through behavior, um, um, at a physical level, but internally, physiologically, we have all these homeostatic mechanisms that allow us to maintain a steady state of affairs in the interior. And of course, even at a special level, right? Species respond to the environment through evolution. Living things grow. We grow, we increase our size through process of mitosis. You start off as two cells, a sperm and an ova. Today you get about 70 trillion cells. It's a large, large, large number. Living things reproduce. We talked about the sperm and the ovum. And again, right, we go from two cells. And in 9 months, we go from two cells, really one cell, the zygote, to about 2 to 3, or a couple trillion cells, just in 9 months, which is a large pattern of growth. Last but not least, living things undergo cellular respiration, right? Why do you breathe in? Well, it's to get oxygen. Why do you eat? Well, it's to get glucose, or stuff you can turn into glucose. And what you do with oxygen and glucose is, of course, to turn it into CO2 and water. And then sidereally, it's not really part of the chemical equation. Through the action of the mitochondria, I can take those raw materials of oxygen and glucose and turn them into ATP, right? Where CO2 and water are sort of waste products. But you should be familiar with that equation, or at least recognize the cellular respiration equation. Living things circulate materials, and we have two circulatory systems, really. We have the cardiovascular system, right, that moves blood around, but we also have this lymphatic system, right, that circulates the lymph. So lymph is fluid. Lymph is really important in delivering white blood cells and taking away waste products from cells. You may have been aware of your lymphatic circulatory system. Sometimes when you're really sick, you'll get swollen lymph nodes in your armpits or groin or your neck. And the lymphatic system doesn't have a pump. The cardiovascular system has a heart to move blood around. Lymphatic system relies solely on muscular movement to move that lymph. So if you're laying around and you just feel like crap, get up. That's why you feel like crap. It's from laying around all the time. You got to get up and do some exercise, right, to move that lymphatic stuff around. That's why massages feel so good. They're helping you move lymph around. Now this list is a little screwy. I got it backwards. We should probably start with digestion. Remember that living things will take in food for energy and raw materials, and they have to break it down into their constituent components, right? So if I eat a chicken breast, it's got a lot of protein in it, and protein's made of amino acids, and I'll chew that meat up, and then I'll start to chemically digest it, so break it down literally into the individual amino acids. Same with sugars, right? When I eat a cracker, it's actually made up of starch, which is a long chain of glucose molecules. I'll break it into individual glucose molecules. That process of digestion is two forms, chemical and mechanical. And once I get it down inside, I start to undergo absorption. Where does absorption happen? In my mouth? No. In my stomach? No. Absorption happens in the stomach. And by absorption, I mean I'm taking the materials from outside and bringing them into the inside. And humans evolved from hot mud, but we're animals, and one of the high watermarks in animal evolution was the formation of the worm, the segmented worm, and the segmented worm were coelomates. That is, they had a true body cavity, and they have a tube within a tube plan, and so do you. You got a tube that goes from here all the way down to your anus. And it's really, you bring the outside world into yourself. And of course, that's where absorption happens. Last but not least is assimilation. And assimilation means I've absorbed the stuff, and now I take those amino acids that were previously chicken breasts, and they turn them into, brine muscle. or whatever. I use those proteins, I take them in, and I start to use them for myself. They become part of me. Last but not least, of course, is excretion. That's the job of the colon. All right, almost done. What do we need? We need food, shelter, space, etc. Of course, we need water, right? You last about 2 days without water. 75% of the body mass is made up of water, and water is the universal solvent. So it helps break down or dissociate ionic compounds like salts and water, acids and bases, and of course, it allows for the chemical reaction of polar or non-polar compounds as well. So the molecules are relying on water for everything to happen. In fact, if you're an exobiologist, uh, you're somebody who studies the potential for life on other planets. We haven't discovered it yet, but just wait. It'll happen within your lifetime. And in fact, when we look just here in the solar system, we see evidence of water. On the moon, we have water at the poles. The same thing's true of Mars, frozen water. and on Mars we have evidence of liquid water. But on I think on Io, one of Jupiter's moons, we have frozen oceans that with volcanic activity. There's like boiling water underneath of there, and you bet your bet the house on that one. They're going to find life there. We take food in, like I said, and we combine it with oxygen. Oxygen's not the most common gas in the atmosphere. The most common gas in the atmosphere is nitrogen. Makes up about 78% of the atmosphere. The other 21% is oxygen. Remember, we use it to make ATP. And then you have the other last 1% is made up of argon, carbon dioxide, and carbon monoxide, and some other stuff in that order. When you ask people what heat is, they're like, oh, I don't know, it's warm. Wrong. Heat really specifically is a measure of atomic kinetic energy. Atomic, atoms, kinetic, movement, energy, right? How are they moving? And atoms move in three directions. They can vibrate, they can rotate or spin in place, and then they can translate. They can move from one spot to another, right? You translate Spanish to English, right? So translational energy is the movement, and I can identify solids, liquids, and gases based on their vibrational, rotational, and translational energies, right? So solids, those atoms are vibrating and they're spinning there, but they kind of stay in place. In fact, if I smash this table, those atoms do move, but then they return to their original position, and that's how we identify solids. They retain their shape. Liquids, on the other hand, those atoms are spinning, they're vibrating, and they do move, but they move weirdly. They move together. That's right. They translate together. Atoms and liquids are moved together, and that's sort of the definition of a liquid. The atoms flow, right? Liquids flow. Last but not least are gases. Gases are the hottest stuff. They're the least dense things. In fact, we can look at liquid, solids, and gases in terms of their densities as well, right? Solids are dense, liquids are less dense, generally speaking, except for water, and then gases are really not that dense at all. So in a gas, we've got atoms that are vibrating rapidly, they're rotating rapidly, and they're translating wildly. We say that gases expand to fill whatever container they're in, and so that idea of atomic kinetic energy and heat and atomic motion relates to pressure as well, right? We rely on pressure. So atmospheric pressure, if you've ever dove to the bottom of the swimming pool, down in the diving section, down deep underneath, you can feel the pressure of water down on you. You're underneath 11 feet of water. Water's really heavy. You can feel it on your ears. You can feel it on your skin. Well, the same thing's true just standing here in your classroom. There's a column of air, and I know air seems light, but it has mass. There's a column of air that's about 200,000 feet high above, pressing down on you. Most of the mass of the atmosphere is in the first 30,000 feet, but it presses down on you with a specific weight. We call that weight 1 atmosphere, which is about 14 pounds per square inch, which is a lot. And pressure specifically is created by the collisions of the material in question, whether it's a gas or a liquid, right, against the container they're in. And so we rely on pressure to get air into our lungs and to move blood around our body. And that's it. See you later.